May all your hopes and high aspirations for the future be as richly rewarding as this achievement. Those were the words on my college diploma when I graduated from the University of Nevada in May of 1999. In just 2 days following graduation, I would be on my way to Europe with my best friends to celebrate this milestone of perseverance. But first, let me take you back 1 week prior to graduation. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, and the only anomaly of the day was a headache that lingered behind my left eyeball, and it was a headache that just wouldn't quit. Tuesday evening, I'm running the base pass in a softball game, and with each impounding stride, it feels as if a river rock is sinking deeper into my skull, and excruciation nearly brings me down to my knees. Later in the week, I'm told by doctors that the headaches would occur from stress of finals, anxiety to graduate, and excitement to go to Europe. And as I'm leaving the parking lot for my first appointment, I backed into a FedEx truck and busted my driver's side taillight and thought to myself, how could my depth perception be so shallow? Saturday was the best I felt all week, perhaps from the antibiotics. Sunday I would graduate, but Monday the headaches were worse than ever. And at this point, there's a stamp on my agenda that says urgent, because in less than 24 hours, I'm supposed to be on a plane to Europe. So my dad and I go to the emergency room at St. Mary's, and after 2.5 hours of testing, we come to find out that the headaches aren't so much headaches after all. When I meet my dad back in the waiting room, and he says, "It doesn't look like you're going to Europe. The doctors think you have a tumor." And what they found in my head was a mass, nearly the size of a racquetball. And all they knew is it needed to be removed ASAP. So I would have a scheduled surgery that following Thursday. And it was during this time of crisis, I realized that I was backed by the best people in the world. My hospital room became a bouquet of hope, with dozens of floral arrangements, hourly visitors, and stacks of get well cards. And it was during this time I realized that the simple act of being there can mean the world. The operation would commence as planned on Thursday morning, followed by several unforeseen complications. Shortly after the initial operation, a seizure stormed through my head. Words became slurs, vision became blurs, and handwriting turned to scribbles. And like the aftermath of a tornado, memories were nowhere to be found, including a chunk of my skull the size of a baseball card. And for the time being, the only protection to my brain was the extent of the flesh that covered it. A few weeks later, my case would be forwarded to UCLA, where they would confirm a final diagnosis and fix my cranial defect. And I learned of the several possibilities that could be the outcome of this operation: stroke, seizures, death. Really? 23 years old. I just graduated college, and I'm not going to Europe. But there was a possibility that I could actually come out of this operation better than I came in. So you're saying there's a chance, right? And this chance, I learned, was hope. Hope can be very powerful. Hope can deliver courage to change the course of a less favorable outcome. And when I awakened from this third operation in UCLA, I was at a peace with myself. And I like to think it was because of the nurse who took care of me in intensive care, because, man, she was smoking hot. I learned that the tumor had been infiltrating into what's called the eloquent part of the brain that controls your ability to speak, to see, and also feel. And had they removed the tumor in its entirety, I would be left in a lifetime of paralysis. And the tumor tissue that was remaining was conclusively diagnosed as primary central nervous system lymphoma, a type of cancer that originates in the brain with the median survival rate of 5 years. Its traditional form of treatment was 5 months of radiation and chemotherapy. But before they can begin all that, they would surgically implant what's called an Ommaya reservoir into my head, where they would administer the chemo drugs, and it would remain in my head for the rest of my life. This isn't good. But get this, the next day, I get a call from UCLA from an oncologist who had been following my case, who told me that there was a treatment in Portland, Oregon, called the blood-brain barrier disruption, which is a form of treatment that doesn't involve radiation, in hopes, and that would be give me the best possibility of the best quality of life. And the treatment will last for a year, but my family and I most confidently and willingly accepted this alternative. Cancer and chemotherapy was much like a time machine. It engaged us in the present, and as I went through my year of chemotherapy, I had time to reflect on my life, on how I became the person I was. And I often daydreamed about how great life could be if my future was optimistic. And before my year of treatment was over, I wanted to take something with me into my survivorship. And I had been keeping a journal, and I'd written down, what you believe is what you become. Because I believed that I was going to be a survivor after this treatment, and I would carry that with me for the rest of my life. But life after treatment wasn't necessarily happily ever after. In fact, there were many hardships that followed. As you can see, I had undergone some serious brain trauma. When I first got out of the hospital, I was slurring my words when I spoke. I couldn't remember anybody's name. The road to recovery was expected to take time. When I began to taper off the medications from chemotherapy, I began a downward spiral. And as I came down from the medications, I became deeply depressed as well. The tapering took me down with them. And looking back from the time that I graduated up until this point, I had a great support network. But time goes on, and people move forward with their lives. They graduate, they go to graduate school, they travel, they begin their careers, and here I was, left in the wake of cancer and chemotherapy. And I thought, how could I have hope and high aspirations of my future being optimistic compared to when I graduated college? Was a question that I pondered. And I also pondered, how do I get through this almost every day? Until the first weekend of June 2001, I found the answer. You see, while I was going through chemotherapy, I was privileged enough to be chosen by the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society to be an honored patient for their fundraising initiative called Team in Training, a group of people from across the United States that train for marathons, century bike rides, and triathlons. And I would become an honored patient among this group, along with several other cancer patients, and they would raise money on our behalf. Well, in June of 2001, I was invited by the cycling coach in the Reno Tahoe area to participate in the bike ride known as America's Most Beautiful Bike Ride. And I didn't know what the day would bring me, but I accepted the challenge. I had begun riding the bike that day, and I remember the first rest stop was Emerald Bay, and watching the sunrise was the most beautiful spectacle I had seen in years. And I knew at that point that the day had something special in store for me. I would continue riding around the lake, 25 miles into Homewood, got halfway around the lake, lunch stop at Kings Beach. I'm completely exhausted and tapped out. And then we start the ascent up Spooner Summit. And I'm just grinding the gears, and I just kept thinking that I was a little engine that could. I think I can. I think I can. I think I can. And wouldn't you know, I ended up finishing this 72-mile bike ride around Tahoe and ended in a moment of rapture. And it was at that moment I knew what my mission was. I would decide that the next year I would join Team in Training as a participant and raise all the money that I needed to raise and participate in the full 100-mile bike ride. And from then on, my life transcended into a lifestyle of endurance sports. I would compete in several 100-mile bike rides, several short-distance triathlons, and a marathon. And over the course of the years, I would raise a total of $125,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And then 2009 came around, and I was inspired by a really good friend of mine in the sports industry. His name is Bonner Paddock, and he was the first person with cerebral palsy to ever summit Mount Kilimanjaro. And with that feat, he began a charity called the One Man Foundation, and his goal was to build centers around the world for children less fortunate and children with disabilities. I was greatly inspired by this initiative, and I began to think, 2010 is going to be my 10th year remission. What am I going to do to celebrate? I competed in the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon that June, and when I finished that race, it dawned on me. I started thinking about, I might do a full Ironman triathlon. And I finally decided to make the commitment. I'm going to do an Ironman triathlon to celebrate my 10th year of remission from brain cancer. And with that initiative, I decided to start a scholarship fund for young adult cancer survivors, and I named it My Hometown Heroes. The people that were there for me during my trying times in the hospital, they were my heroes. And I named it based on their inspiration. And the goal that year was to raise $10,000 to symbolize the decade milestone of being cancer-free. I would finish that year first in the state of Nevada, less than 12 hours, among better than the top third of all competitors, raised over $10,000, and had one hell of a time doing it. And in 2001, we would award our first scholarship recipient. We would bring her out to an Aces game, and she would throw a first pitch. And since then, we have awarded 8 recipients from across the United States scholarships. And what I learned about my own survivorship and these survivors is that survivorship is an expression. I express myself through endurance sports. Shane expresses himself through hockey. He's a survivor. Garrett loves baseball. He now coaches baseball at Reno High. While my goal was to raise $10,000 in 2010, there is a great need out there. According to the National Cancer Institute, there are over 70,000 young adults between the ages of 15 and 39 are diagnosed every year. It remains the most deadly disease among this demographic. The average student debt after college graduation is in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000. My Hometown Heroes has now expanded our mission. While in 2010 our goal was to raise $10,000, our goal for 2020 is now to raise $1 million, to give away $1 million by my 20th year remission in 2020. And while I was going through chemotherapy, I began to write. I began keeping a journal, and I wrote an essay for all my friends to thank them for what they had done for being there for me. And people started telling me, this is good stuff. You should write a book. And I started working for a startup company called Access Pass and Design in 2002, and I got really busy living my life. And it kind of took the back burner for a while. But eventually, I committed to finishing the book. And before this wonderful event concludes, I want to leave with you a piece of my mind. Well, what's left of it anyway. We asked scholarship candidates from My Hometown Heroes, where do you want to be in 5 years? And we also asked them, if there's one thing in the world that you want to change, what would it be, and how would you do it? So I bring forth the challenge to you. Where do you want to be in 5 to 10 years? And if you're to change one thing in the world, what would it be, and how would you do it? Because you never know. One day, your hopes and aspirations could be more amazing than you ever dreamed possible.